letting go doesn't mean that you don't care about someone anymore. It's just realizing that the only person you really have control over is yourself. Says Deborah Rebbe in the famous book Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul. You cannot force happiness onto someone. The only thing you can do for them is to help give it to them. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's hard, but all the time it's the right thing to do. And so, once upon a time, Hans looked at the black and white pictures in front of him. It was hard to see them clearly through the tears, but looking at the hard truth in the eye was what life had taught him. He looked long and hard at the pictures of his wife in the arms of another man, and then sighed. How long back was this? He asked the detective in front of him. It was about 2 days ago, sir, the detective responded. Hans nodded. Thank you for your services, and please take your check from my assistant outside. The detective thanked Hans and showed himself out of the office chamber to leave Hans alone with his thoughts. A light snow fell on the city of Berlin. The open window framed a beautiful view of the Brandenburg Gate in the distance. Hans wiped his tears and thought back to last 2 months of emotional upheaval that had led him to hire a detective. His wife, Julia, was a picture of unhappiness. She would cry without a reason, lose her temper over little things. He noticed that she took a pill to sleep every night, and what was more, she seemed to pull away from him every time he tried to touch her. It did not take Hans a lot of time to figure out that something was wrong. Horribly wrong. And now, the detective had confirmed his worst fears. There was no choice but to confront Julia. It was dinner time when Hans finally made it home through the evening traffic. He found Julia in the kitchen, working on a salad. I think we need to talk, Julia, he said, trying not to give away too much, but Julia was a woman having an affair, and she saw through the tone. Everything okay? She asked shakily. Hans did not respond, and Julia kept her look steady. She then wiped her hands with a kitchen napkin and gestured to Hans that perhaps the lounge was a better place to talk about something she knew was coming her way. Hans placed the pictures on the coffee table. Julia looked at them and did not have the courage to look up at Hans. She began to cry and sat herself down on the couch, her head bowed. You do agree that an honest conversation is the only way out of here, don't you, Julia? Hans asked. Julia nodded. Since when? About 3 months. Is it just sex? No. Do you love him? Julia did not answer. Do you love him? Hans repeated the question. Julia nodded. As her sobbing did not allow her to speak, Hans kneeled down in front of Julia and took her face in his hands. You know why we got married, Julia? We got married because we made each other happy. Two people come together because they find happiness with each other. That is a reason for two people to be together. And if for any reason that stops to happen and you are unhappy, then why continue? Makes no sense to me. Julia looked up at Hans, confused. Julia, you're free. You have no need to hide. You're free to go and seek happiness where you can find it. Marriage is a union of happiness. It's not a union of compulsion. I love you enough not to chain you. Julia stared, not believing her ears. Hans smiled and gently kissed her on her forehead. You can only give me what you have if you have no happiness. You cannot make me happy. Go fill your heart with happiness. Julia hugged Hans very tight. The tragedy of being unable to love a good man was the worst curse of them all.